Russian Attack or Green Beret, which was his European and Japanese name, is a 1985 Konami run-and gun hack-and-slash game. That is one that I once played in the arcade and played it relentlessly on my Commodore 64 back in the day. Its theme is set around the Soviet era, which of course was a thing in 1985 when this released, where we must guide our Green Beret character through 4 stages in the game. One hit and you are dead. The aim is to rescue captives being held by the Soviet forces. Throughout the game we are armed with a combat knife and have the option of picking up extra weapons off dead enemies, such as rocket launchers, which can come in handy at times as this will kill several soldiers all in one go. The game was once very frustratingly difficult for me as soldiers would shoot so close to you that you not have chance to duck. Overall, it's a superb game which holds many memories for many people. So today we are ranking from worst to the very best home conversions. I will note that anything considered aftermarket, such as the quite recent Amiga release, will not be included. This is strictly commercial years releases as always. Even for Commodore 16 and Commodore Plus 4 fans, this imagined 1986 port is just utterly shocking. I have no idea on the backstory for this version, but it just seems like it is half finished. Or it could be finished, who knows. The issue with Ocean, who owns the Imagine label, was that they were notorious for releasing really bad games like this one. But having said that, some of Imagine's other versions of Green Beret was pretty amazing, as you'll see in this video. The Commodore 16 or Commodore Plus 4 port is just, well, really bad. From climbing ladders, which just looks and feels like the Green Beret is flying rather than climbing, to rockets that looks utterly bizarre in the background. There is even a command prompt in the top left hand corner as the game is playing. Things like this really shouldn't be here. It's weirdly worth playing just to see how truly terrible this version is. For those of you unsure about the Thomson No.5 computer, it was a French 8-bit computer which wasn't as popular as Commodore 64 or even the ZX Spectrum here in the UK at least, but it did have its fair share of arcade ports and Green Beret was one of them. Is it a good conversion for this French system? No, it really isn't. It's not multi-scrolling either, and when we reach the opposite side of the gameplay screen, it takes a few seconds just to scroll to the next screen, which can get very annoying. It's fairly sluggish to control and can be irritating to judge attacks when hitting enemies. Bullets being shot at you can sometimes be missed as color clash makes it difficult to see bullets being shot at you. After dying, we respawn on the same screen rather than going to the checkpoint like most versions. As good as this sounds, you are often respawned and killed instantly by enemies who happens to be running in the same area. It's not a good port and doesn't even include iconic drum roll music. What can I say about Konami's 1986 MSX release? Well, as you will gather from the gameplay video, this one is a slow game. My first impressions weren't great. One of the learning curves with this version is that the range of your knife is fairly short, and so attacking soldiers can be a little bit strange to begin with as they need to be fairly close to you. The screen scrolls fairly slowly, which can get a little frustrating when jumping off of things when landmines are beneath you. In other words, judging a jump to avoid being blown up is fairly tricky here. Climbing ladders also look strange here as well, with sprites looking a little odd too. Is it a good play? It's okay. It certainly could be much worse. The music and sound effects are fairly decent here though. It really is the slow pace which brings this MSX version down. For those of you not in the know with the BBC Micro, this was an early 1980s British computer mainly designed by Acorn Computers for education. But just like any other microcomputer that came and went during this era, we have games too. So is Green Beret good for this classic British 8-bit? Surprisingly, it looks and sounds really well, or rather, this game looks and plays really well for a BBC game. It is missing particular elements such as grenade launchers and a few other bits and pieces too. Most interestingly, as we get through the first half of stage 1, we don't actually have a row of tanks to climb on. Instead, these have been replaced by huts. This 1987 Imagine software release isn't bad at all. The issue here really though is that this port has no joystick support. Now, by no means is the Atari 8-bit computer's conversion any good, but considering the terrible versions have already covered at this point, then we will say that this is likely the best of the worst home conversions. It's another situation where enemies need to be extremely close to you in order to attack and kill them. It is missing parts such as grenade launchers. It does look strange in places, but surprisingly, it actually controls really well. It does seem slightly unfinished, as when we are playing, random code flashes on screen from time to time. Like I say, very likely the best version of the worst versions of Green Beret. As much as I attempted to get into the Amstrad CPC's 1986 Imagine port, I just found it very wooden to control my Green Beret character. It definitely looks good and has its own spin on the background music, which I was getting into the groove with. The sound effects is also included, so we got music and sound effects together with this version. It is nice and bright. My main issue with this version is mainly the controller. It just doesn't seem that great to control and attack. When I was repeatedly tap and attack, it takes time to have the character on screen follow up the button request. It surprisingly isn't a multi-scroller either, much like the MO5 conversion and a couple of other versions in this video. This one expects you to wait whilst the next gameplay screen moves forward. I didn't get too far with this game, and honestly I found this version fairly frustrating to play. I thought I would chuck in the Famicom Disk Systems conversion here, which is pretty much identical to the next port in this video. I rank this one here as, unlike the next version, this one had very annoying loading times. Now, as great as this version is, and this was released strictly as Russian Attack, the game is different from the arcade game, and that becomes very apparent from stage 2. Bizarrely enough, the first stage, although being the same as the arcade game, is actually missing a couple of things here. Firstly, the Nintendo Entertainment System conversion doesn't have the soldier who launches grenades at you once making it to the end of the first part of stage 1. And secondly, the Jeep scrolls across the screen at the end of stage 1 to drop off soldiers to fight you isn't here either. The introduction scene to the game is very different too, where the Green Beret parachutes and lands. Like I say, as a game it's great and highly polished for sure, but for this video we are after all looking for the next best thing to the arcade game itself, and this conversion by Konami is just too different. It normally is the case with Nintendo NES games in my series when they do crop up. Altered Beast, for example, was beyond different to everything else in that video. The ZX Spectrum is a damn good conversion. Not only does this one multi-scroll, but controlling the Green Beret is one of the best for the 8-bit microcomputer home conversions. In fact, it fills and responds to button requests just like the original arcade game itself. Absolute perfection in the controlling department, as well as spot collision detection being spot on. We get a proper introduction to each stage where captives are being held. Sound effects are nice here, but there's no music with the ZX Spectrum version. It indeed It looks like the MO5's conversion, but don't let that fool you, this is pure Spectrum Gold. For those who played this growing up, you more than likely adored this version. It's also multi-scrolling too, which means no waiting for the next gameplay screen to scroll along. This one is a solid specky port from Imagine, releasing back in 1986, which even includes the hammer and sickle communist logo, which illustrates remaining lives. Very cool stuff. Quite likely the best 8-bit computer home conversion, the Commodore 64's port was and still is a great game to play. This is the version of Green Beret that I played a hell of a lot of as a kid, owning it on the Hit Squad label. Firstly, as always for Commodore 64, we have top-notch music quality here by the awesome Martin Galway. We have music and sound effects in the game itself, which emulates that sound of the original arcade game extremely well. Just like Spectrum's version, this controls extremely well and scrolls beautifully. By far this one is very challenging. Those bullets certainly travel very quickly here. Color wise, some will argue that the Commodore 64 color palette are kinda dull compared with Amstrad for example, but here they just seem to work so nicely to complement the source material. It's a superb version and is 100% faithful to the original arcade game itself. The Game Boy Advance was blessed with an awesome cartridge back in 2002, known as the Konami's Collector Series. It features several classics, and Russian Attack is one of them. This is a seriously good port of the game, which is why I am ranking this one in first place. It's not an emulated version of the arcade game like many collections had, but a fresh new version for that era of gaming. It's great to control and extremely smooth and very fluid in gameplay. The music and sound effects are very faithful to the arcade game, but seems to sound a little much fresher here. The sprites here are slightly different to the arcade's version, but obviously not overly different where it is totally unrecognisable. Everything is here, including the captive's introduction and all 4 stages. And that's it for ranking the various different home conversions of Green Beret or Russian Attack. Which version did you grow up with? Was you like me and was very impressed with the Commodore 64 version, or did you actually have an MO5 back in the day and played it on there? Let us know in the comments, and as always, thanks for watching.